welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm Pete Mezzetti. My guests this evening are Joe DeLong, who's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and Carl Fortuna, who's the first Selectman of the town of Old Saybrook. Gentlemen, welcome. How are we?
Pete, I'm just excited and appreciative to be here.
I know.
Milestone show for you.
I know, Joe. I know. Hi, Joe.
I am honored to
buddy?
be your guest at such an important occasion.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for coming down. And for those of us, those are the viewers and listeners that don't know, this is actually a very momentous occasion tonight on the Pete Mezzetti Show, because this is show number 500.
So, Pete, when did this start? And I'm actually curious.
Are you going to interview me now?
I am, a little bit. So,
Okay.
how did you get into this, number one? How did this come about that you're on cable access TV? How long ago did you start doing it? And tell us a little bit about that.
All right. It first started a bunch of years ago. I've been doing this for 17 total years. I've been with Valley Shore for about 9 of those 17. And the way that the show got started was I went to Comcast Cable in Clinton to drop off my cable bill. went through the back door to the public access entrance to drop off my bill because it was after hours. Rang the doorbell. The public access coordinator at the time says to me, "Come on in." Okay. So we were talking, and he says to me, "The town of Clinton does not have a community affairs show." I'm like, "Okay, that's interesting. I'll be back." My mom was on the board of Selectmen in Clinton at the time, ran across the street to a meeting. I was meeting her at the town hall. Willie Fritz, who was the first Selectman in time, I'm sure you both know that name.
Mm-hmm. I know the name.
Okay.
Oh, I remember Willie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I say to him, "Hey, the town of Clinton doesn't have a public access show." Walks around his desk, pats me on the shoulder, shakes my hand. "Congratulations, it's yours." And he was actually my first guest for the first edition of the show, and we talked about the budget because it was right around budget time for the town of Clinton.
So, did you have a desire to get into this? Like, how did that? Or it sounds like you're.
Yeah.
It's a coincidence.
It was a coincidence.
But did you have a desire to get into either public access or interviewing people or TV?
No.
Were you going to be a movie star is my question.
No, I wasn't going to be a movie star. I was just going to be Pete Mezzetti, but it then morphed and transformed into what we see now.
Which is Pete Mezzetti, movie star.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. 500 shows is a lot of shows. It's
Yes.
an amazing accomplishment. It really is.
Absolutely.
500 guests.
Oh, absolutely.
Interviewing 500 people is not easy.
Right.
And I'm about 100 of them, I'd say, of the 500. Not
yeah,
quite.
Sure.
Probably 5 or so anyway. And I thank you for that
Yes,
opportunity.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, that's how. And you've had incredible guests.
Absolutely.
Lieutenant Governor Wyman, I know. Congressman Courtney.
Right.
Why don't you tell us maybe one of your favorite interviews?
I would have to say one of my favorite interviews, besides Congressman Courtney.
Be careful where you go here, because you have 2 of your former guests here.
And you two.
Yeah.
I'd have to say one of my other favorites is forensics expert Dr. Henry Lee.
Oh, right.
Oh, wow,
When Dr. Lee was here. That was a very interesting show. Matter of fact, DOT Commissioner Giletti was here not long ago. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah. Well, Henry Lee was on the circuit. He was on the talk show circuit or talk circuit.
Yeah.
I remember getting Henry Lee as a guest, a speaking guest, or certainly on a TV show was a get, because he was a really interesting guy. I don't know where he is. I don't even know where he is these days.
I'm not sure.
He's in town.
He's actually still teaches at the University of New Haven.
Yeah.
Wow, no kidding.
He still teaches at UNH, and they actually have the Dr. Henry Lee Forensics Institute on the campus of the University of New Haven.
Okay. So where do we go from here, Pete? Do you stay another 500 shows, you think?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, okay.
As long as I can put a sentence together, I'm good.
Okay. All right. That's anyway. Congratulations
Hey,
on
thank
that
you.
because
Thank you.
sticking with it, and of course your staff has been great.
Oh, everybody here is awesome.
Every time I've come in here, it's incredibly professional, really well done, and the studios are beautiful. I mean,
Absolutely.
really nice. So.
You know, Pete, it's interesting. And Carl's right. It's professional, but it also speaks to what community access television should be like when you come in here. Because I know, and I know Carl does as well. I get called to do a lot of network TV type interviews.
Yeah.
And some pretty popular high-end type, high-rating shows.
Mm-hmm.
And inevitably, you get to the studio and they're running behind, number one. The person who's going to interview you, who is always well put together and as a professional on TV, behind the scenes, they're running around trying to find their hairbrush and trying to find their notes and trying to do a sound check 2 seconds before the thing's getting ready to run, and it sounds like it's always like a fire drill that goes on. And then the moment the shows are done, it's a really quick, hey, thanks for coming on, see you later, and get you out the door.
Yeah.
Where with you, it's a couple of days of like preparation of, hey, what all should we talk about? How do you guys feel about this? And then when it's over with, it's typically time with your staff here, with the great staff here,
Right.
and usually an invitation to go to dinner afterwards
Right.
and to talk about things that are connected to the community.
Right.
And that's a difference that the people on the screen may not always see.
No, absolutely
I
not.
think to some degree, it does come through on the screen
Right.
because it's very local, very personal, it's very real. And so I know that with my schedule, a lot of times I'll look at some of these interviews and I'll be like, oh yeah, I got that tonight. Oh, I'll have to do that later on this week. I always look forward to coming here and spending the night with
Absolutely.
you.
We
It's
look
always a
forward
lot
to
of
having
fun, and you just feel like you're sitting in a living room with friends.
Exactly.
So congratulations on
thank
that as
you.
well, because that's a unique thing to pull off.
And on the public access part of it, people watch it, and I know
I
because
hope.
every time. No, they do, because when I'm on, I get comments from citizens in town saying, "Hey, I was kind of popping through my channels and I saw you on TV," and I said that must be the Pete Mezzetti show. And a few
Absolutely.
times, I put up the link. You've sent me the link to the show, and I'll put it on the town website because. I'm not here campaigning. I'm here talking about issues.
Right.
And we have on our town website, if you sign up for it, you get a push email, and so it's going out to
Oh, is it?
1,000
Okay.
people, 2,000 people.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm all about promoting Pete Mezzetti show.
There
so
you there you
that's
go.
how I do it.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for the nice words.
You know, one last story,
Yes.
which you'll remember, and so will Carl. On one of the previous appearances when we were on here together during the height of COVID, so everything was over Zoom.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The
I know where you're going.
the only time that I have ever done an interview, whether on Zoom or anything else, whether it was a meeting or whatever, that we were right in the heat of talking about something very important.
Yeah. that's
And
right.
my young daughter went into my basement and flipped open a freezer down there to get out an ice cream.
That's right.
And when she did it, she knocked off a plug that came through to the router and knocked us offline. So,
That's right.
which was good. Carl was just able to pick up
'cause
and bring it
Carl
home. It didn't
Carl and
matter.
I think we carried the rest of the
Yeah.
show.
So it was the only time that I was ever on a TV taping that my interview was lost because of my daughter getting ice cream.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was thinking, geez, I haven't been in the studio with Joe, but I remember that on
That's
Zoom.
right. I do
now.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You and I were in together.
Yeah, today I had my first board meeting in person of this particular board that I've had since March of 20.
Okay.
And it's funny when you're used to seeing people over and over on a computer screen, you
Right.
think you have a pretty good idea of what they look like, and then you see them in person and a little bit of a different impression. And CCM and KERMA have started to meet in person, but this board was the first meeting in person, and it was really nice.
Which
I
board?
have to say, the MIRA board,
Okay,
Materials
okay,
Innovation
right.
Recycling Authority.
Yep.
So good to see people in person that I've never met in person. Some of
Really?
those folks, yeah. I was newer to the board in late 19, early 2020,
Okay.
and so some of the folks there's been a lot of turnover on the board, number one. Number two, some of the folks that have been appointed I've never met personally. And just good people, really good to be in person. I thought the conversation, and it was about a 3-hour meeting, the conversation is much more direct and much, when you're having a conversation with someone and maybe a little bit of a disagreement, it's a lot better in person,
right.
I think, than it is over Zoom. That's for whatever reason, and we had a few of those disagreements today, but we'll work them out.
There you go. Now, Carl, let me ask you this. As far as you mentioned Mira, obviously they're the trash authority.
Trash authority.
Now, I saw on the news recently that they're closing their facility in, is that Hartford?
Yeah, South Meadows in Hartford.
Okay. Now, what does that mean for the area?
So how much time do you have?
We got some time. Go for it.
No. So Mira is the trash authority, a quasi-public organization. Okay. Was the trash organization for 52 towns, which meant they burn the garbage. It was a trash to energy plant that you read about that is closing. By August 30, by the end of August, it's going to be shut down.
Okay.
So the trash that is generated from the remaining Mira towns, and there used to be 50 to 55, there are now only 20 to 25 towns.
All right.
So the amount of garbage that Mira is controlling is a lot less. But what it does mean for the towns that remain in Mira and the towns that are no longer in Mira is that trash is most likely going to be transported out of state and buried in the ground somewhere. Okay?
Right.
So it no longer will be burned, it will no longer be trash to energy. It is an incredibly environmentally unsound occurrence that has taken place here. This is a problem. The end of the Mira plant, the trash to energy plant, was something that was identified 14 years ago. Needed lots of investment. It never came, and most recently Governor Lamont and Commissioner Dykes decided that the plant in Hartford and South Meadows was not something they wanted to invest in, maybe for a lot of good reasons.
Right.
It's in an environmental justice community, which is all over the country. These types of these sightings of either landfills or trash energy plants tend to happen in those communities,
right.
Which is a bad decision in the first place. So, but there's no alternative now in terms of trash to energy or burning of garbage. And as a result of that, there are other plants in the state, but they're at full capacity.
Right.
So there's not a lot of other places for the garbage that was the Mira towns or were the Mira towns to go. It's just, there is, and I know Joe knows this, there is a working group, a task force that has been appointed to try to envision the path forward for Connecticut, because eventually some of these other trash to energy plants are going to close. I think there's 3 or 4 others.
Yes. Yeah.
They're also going to have some major repairs that need to be made, and the money may not be there to make those repairs. So what does Connecticut want to do with their trash going forward? Do we want to be self-sufficient with our trash?
Right.
Or are we just going to say, leave it at the curb, take it away, I don't care where it goes, and I don't care what state it goes, I don't care what community it goes to, and it's going to go in the ground. So I was talking, when I left the meeting, I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone. This is a hard topic to talk to my girlfriend about, or,
Right.
because what happens, eyes glaze over.
Right.
They're like, I put my trash out, it goes away. That's all I know.
Right. You don't know where it goes.
But it's going to get a lot more expensive. And do we really want to put more trucks on the road, more diesel-powered trucks on the road at $6 a gallon diesel?
Right, exactly.
it's a horrible environmental position that the state of Connecticut, which is, I hate the word progressive when we only talk about good things. I mean, you can be progressive in many directions, but we consider ourselves to be progressive in terms of good solutions. And this is a bad solution. And I don't blame the governor, and I don't blame Commissioner Dykes. In fact, I will tell you, Commissioner Dykes, I think, is doing tremendous work.
Yeah.
Trying to move the needle. But moving the needle is going to be difficult when you start talking, oh, let's recycle more. Let's have people compost more. That's not going to happen on a large scale unless you have major investment in the state of Connecticut in plants that will anaerobic digestion plants that will take the food. There's a couple of them in the state of Connecticut right now. The solutions have to be big, and quite frankly, they have to be public.
Yeah.
This isn't going to come from private money. And Joe, I know, is working on this through CCM. Joe, I don't know if you have something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it is an incredibly difficult issue, if not simply for the fact that I can say, I'm Joe DeLong, I'm running for governor, and what I'm going to do is make sure that your trash is properly taken care of.
Right.
Like, it doesn't garner that type of attention. And when it does gather that type of attention and somebody says, no, we have to be responsible, I'm John Q. Public, and this is important to me, and I don't want this trucked out of state, and I don't want it buried underground, and I want to do the right things, and we come back to them and say, well, okay, well, that takes a budgetary commitment that now there's not as much money available for these other projects that you care about, X, Y, and Z, or it's going to be an additional cost or an additional expense. And now all of a sudden that John Q. Public person says, wait a minute, yeah, it's important to me, it might be a little further down. The other side of the issue that's somewhat tricky that people don't think about is when you talk about something like the Mira plant, or these plants once they go offline, they essentially become what you think of as like a Brownsfield or something. They become a massive site that takes incredible cleanup. Now, if I'm a community that's willing to host a new trash site, the first thing that I want to know is that when that site goes offline, are you going to clean it up? Are you going to take care of my community? Is this going to be a workable piece of land? In order to do that, you have a responsibility to things like the Mira plant in the city of Hartford. You have to be able to show that, yes, we as a state have a history that when it's time for this plant to close, we're not going to just leave it there as some dinosaur structure that's now a piece of property that's off of the tax rolls and you can't develop anything around it. Right. So there's expense on the solution side, but there's also a lot of expense associated with the cleanup side. And if you don't take care of the cleanup, not too many people are willing to come on board to be a part of the next solution.
So on the cleanup side, and I know you know this, the South Meadows plant was a coal plant.
Oh, okay.
Formerly a coal plant, and then it became a trash to energy plant. Sitting on the board of directors, that piece of property is cleaner now than it was when Mira started.
Sure,
so,
no question. Yes.
I want to be, there is talk about the site and what the site's going to look like after Mira exits stage left as an organization. But that is not going to be the responsibility of Mira or the Mira towns.
Correct.
And I just want to be clear on that, because that is an issue that does come up at the board of directors meeting. The solution that we're coming up with, think about it. Okay? You go to the beach, you break a beach chair, you throw it in the garbage. That's going to end up in the ground somewhere.
Right.
We dredged in Old Saybrook, we dredged North Cove about 5 years ago. And I remember looking out and saying, there has to be a better way than watching a machine do this for 2 months, and then you put it on, I think they call them scups, and they take them to a bigger ship, and then it goes to New Haven and they dump it. I'm like, boy, that's 100-year-old technology. And that's what we're doing with garbage. We're using the same solution we were using 100 years ago. And I know no one wants to hear about this topic, but it's going to take state of Connecticut public investment to create a solution, and that solution is 10 years away, minimum 10 years away, because there's just not the will right now to make it happen sooner. And again, sighting is going to be a huge issue. Sighting, you're going to have trucks coming through your roads in your community. Right. So it's a big issue that I try to raise. I've raised it on your show before. Mm-hmm. I write about it in town, in my local newspaper. Try to encourage people to do a little bit better. It's just not easy to do. No. Not an easy topic.
Absolutely.
On that light note.
Yeah, I know. I get. So, I dread when people talk to me at parties sometimes, because I can go down the rabbit hole quick. And a good friend of mine who lives in New York, he was vacationing in the Adirondacks, or he was in upstate New York, and he goes, I ran into a lady from Old Saybrook. I'm like, get out of here. Yeah. All she could tell me about was the septic issues in town. And we have this huge project, and I'm like, oh my God, And so he now will ask me now and then, because I informed him of all the issues that we're facing and what we have to do to satisfy DEP going forward. And so he'll now ask me about that. But boy, I'll tell you, I can make people's eyes glaze over pretty fast.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joe, what's going on with TCM?
Well, we're going to be hosting the gubernatorial debate
again.
The last gubernatorial debate a week before the general election at our conference. We did that 4 years ago. Okay. And one of the reasons why that's important is exactly for the rabbit hole that Carl talked about going down, because when you put these candidates up in front of a room of local elected officials from all over the state, they're expected to address some of these issues that are so vitally important that maybe aren't the hot button issues the rest of the campaign, but really have major impacts on our communities. So it highlights these issues that sometimes otherwise aren't highlighted, but really need to be highlighted. So that's something I think that that we're proud of and really looking forward to doing. And other than that, for us at CCM, it's business as usual. It's trying to work with legislators. It's trying to collaborate with people and bring people together. I thought it was so interesting when Carl was talking about Zoom and the difference between being on a Zoom meeting or being in person. And what I think we found that we've learned from our perspective is Zoom is great for getting some people access or involved that otherwise weren't, that couldn't come to in-person meetings, and you're reaching different audiences. But you can't do it all the time. You have to have that in-person aspect. And if you really think about it, and this isn't a statement against any political party or one side or the other, but if you really just look at the last, 5-6 years of what's happened in our political climate, of the animosity against, from one party to another, and some of the vile things that we see sometimes come down from Washington, D.C., it's so important, probably more important now than ever, that we bring people together to communicate face to face and right across the table and collaborate, because the pandemic from that standpoint could not have hit at a worse time. No. We were already being divided. We were already getting pulled apart in so many different directions, not in a way of I disagree with you. It was becoming I dislike you. And so we had that happening in our political environment, and then we had the pandemic that kept people from sitting down face to face and talking to each other, and I think it exacerbated a little bit. So, for me, it's been really nice in an organization that really is all about the collective. It's all about bringing together different views, different parties, different perspectives, but people that you have tremendous respect for, and giving them an opportunity to learn from each other is so vital. And I know we've talked on this show before, Pete, and I always I want to bring it up with Carl here, because it's a perfect example. You see at the state level, it's getting a little bit worse. It's not quite as bad as at the national level. At the national level, it's terrible. But at CCM, I've been able to work with people like your old friend Susan Bransfield, who was a Democrat first selectman from Portland.
Absolutely.
And then Carl, who's a Republican from Old Saybrook. And I can tell you, sitting in a room across the table, I wouldn't know if Carl was a Republican or Susan was a Democrat. They're two local elected officials that were trying to work out
My favorite
issues for their communities, so.
That's one thing I tell people over and over again. Not only that, I mean, through CCM, I get to meet a lot more folks who are in these CEO positions. And in the entire room, when we have 100 people in the room, you're probably not going to be able to tell the Democrat from the Republican because it's all solution oriented. Nobody is up there on their soapbox saying, old Saybrook, you don't want affordable housing. Well, I tout how much we do with affordable housing in Old Saybrook because it's the right thing to do, and it's not. You can't put that in a box and say it's a Republican or a Democrat issue, but it's my favorite thing about this job that I have right now, that I'm lucky enough to hold, I guess, right, is that you're just trying to move the ball forward and do what's best for your community. It isn't about partisan politics. And we all go home at night and we read in the paper the next day what goes on either at the state or the federal level. But I love being able to call Norm Needleman, who I consider a friend, and we find so much common ground together. Angus McDonald in Deep River, Tim Griswold in Old Lyme, and even the mayor of Hartford, who is a statewide political figure. Luke and I have had great conversations on a variety of topics, and it's not partisan. And once for some reason, it falls apart at the state level. And you can't vote a certain way up there. If you're a freshman, let's just say freshman Republican or a freshman Democrat, you are not an independent, I shouldn't say this on TV, but I am. You're not an independent voice.
The truth will set you free.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, apparently. Either that or it's going to do something else.
Yeah, right.
But you're not an independent voice because you're not allowed to be an independent voice because you're whipped into a position up there. And it's so different at the town level. And I don't know, Joe, you're from West Virginia. I don't know if you saw that. Is it the same down there also?
Well, I think it is now. I think there's this trend, unfortunately, that's gone that direction. I know, years ago, I was the majority leader.
Yep.
One of my very best friends in the legislature was the minority leader.
Ooh.
And we would go to dinner, a couple nights a week, and we would talk about, and there were areas where we disagreed, but we never let those areas where we disagreed define us and slow down our progress in all the areas where we did agree. Yeah. In fact, we would even say things like, listen, we're completely on opposite ends of this issue. Let's go out and let's fight it out, but we're going to hold our debate to this many minutes. I'm going to talk for this long. I'm going to say these things. You're going to talk for this long. You're going to say these things. And we're going to let the vote fall where it may, and then we're going to move on to the areas where we can work together. You just don't see as much of that. But I think what's happened is local elected officials are so directly in touch with their constituencies. They're with them in the grocery store, at the coffee shop, just walking down the street. And what they do actually impacts people's lives in a tangible way in which people can see. Right. They see it and they feel it. So local elected officials are really running campaigns based off of challenges, based off of issues and opportunities within communities. When you get to the state level, in many cases, they're running campaigns based off of party platforms. Yeah. And at the national level, it's all based off of party platforms. Right. You even look here in Connecticut at the state level, how much after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, that abortion is now an issue, not at the federal level, but is being used as this massive campaign issue at the state level. Now, it's not even an issue in Connecticut. Of course, there are pro-life people here, no question about that. But the overwhelming masses, regardless of which party that they're in, this is a pro-choice state, and so we waste so much time on those things that are platform issues that are really designed to divide us, as opposed to what these guys do, which get together and say, I'm dealing with this in my community. How did you deal with it in yours? And what were the outcomes? And how can we emulate that, or how can we learn from each other? Because in reality, for the most part, now they all have their own, they have their views, whether they're a little more liberal or a little more conservative, all those types of things. But at the end of the day, they have an actual job as a CEO to run something. Right. Much like a CEO has to run a company, they actually have to run a community, where other elected officials at higher levels, they don't have to run anything. Right. They can debate stuff and they can go home, and things kind of run themselves in different ways. And you even look at the federal level, for years we don't even have to have balanced budgets. Right. Yeah. Now, could you imagine if Carl puts forth a budget at Old Saybrook that's not, well, we don't need to have a balanced budget. It's just a budget. It's everything we want to do. Don't worry about it being balanced. You know what I mean? And so that's where I think that disconnect, because it's a real disconnect from reality. They deal with reality at the local level, and the further you get removed from that, the less reality you deal with.
Which really amplifies the role of CCM. Right. Okay, because you get these platform issues at the state level, and the towns are the CEOs are just trying to run the town. Right. And then you get some of these platform issues, Democrat or Republican, and we rely on CCM to be our advocacy voice up there to maybe fight on the extremes against either one of these advocacy issues. And so I can tell you, and I'm not here to toot Joe's horn, but I might as well, right?
I
mean,
he's
he's to my right, and he's in the room, and we're on TV. Right. But my head explodes when I see some of the bills that get proposed early in the session. And I'll email Randy Collins over there, or Brian, or Mike, or what a great staff that Joe has over at CCM. But they are up there trying to, again, I guess I don't care all that much, impart some common sense legislation on some of these bills that get proposed. And I'll tell people, you can't believe the bill. Some of the bills that get proposed, you can't believe. It's people, they're in a bubble. They clearly have, they're out of touch with reality and have no idea the impact, if they were to pass that bill and have it signed by the governor, that it would have on either any community or the taxpayers in this town of Old Saybrook or the state of Connecticut. So we rely on CCM and that team up there to really assist us with identifying problem issues that appear in the legislative session early, and then working to defeat them. And Joe and his staff ask certain members of our communities, that might be impacted, to maybe come up and testify, submit legislation, submit written testimony, or the like. So anyway.
Would you guys mind sticking around for another segment?
Be glad to.
All right, we'll be right back.
You matter.
You matter.
You matter.
And your words matter too.
Your words matter.
What you say in the hallways at school or in the student section at a game matters.
Words can be hurtful.
Words can be offensive.
Words can leave scars.
Words can also inspire,
support, and uplift.
You and your words.
Are they both important?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Community TV, your neighborhood TV.
Publicly funded and a reliable partner for cable companies nationwide, it provides transparent coverage of local and state government, education, and public programming.
A digital town green that can be watched anywhere, anytime, and on any device.
Watch us on today's high-tech distribution methods.
Community TV in Connecticut.
Local,
unfiltered,
reliable, and yours.
Welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm Pete Mezzetti, sitting here with Carl Fortuna and Joe DeLong. Carl is the first selectman of the town of Old Saybrook, and Joe is the executive director for the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Gentlemen, I'm going to use that term loosely. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. I've been called worse.
No doubt.
I'm sure you have. So, Joe, let's open up this segment. I'm going to ask you about mirrors.
Yeah, so when we finished the last segment, Carl was talking about sometimes the disconnect, not sometimes, a lot of times, the disconnect from reality that happens at the legislative level and some of the work that we try to do at the State House. Well, There's this system called MERS that not every community's in. Old Saybrook's not in it, but the MERS stands for the Municipal Employees Retirement System.
Okay.
And it is the retirement system that local governments can get into that's run by the state. So to talk about some of the insanity that happens up there, when the Municipal Employee Retirement System was created, that's for local employees, for the communities that are in it. You also had its kind of sister retirement plan called SERS, which stands for State Employee Retirement System.
Okay.
So the state workers are in this system, the municipal employees are in this system. Makes sense, right?
Sure.
Well, what happened was when these systems were developed, the state realized very quickly that this isn't sustainable. We have to reform this system because the costs are going through the roof and long term it doesn't work.
Okay.
So what the state has done year after year is they've created new tiers in the state employee retirement system in order to try to make it more sustainable, so new hires no longer come in on what was tier 1, they would come in at a tier 2.
Okay.
And when tier 2 wasn't sustainable, they created a tier 3. And then when tier 3 wasn't sustainable, they created a tier 4, each time to try to make it a more sustainable system.
Okay.
But in doing that, every time they left its sister system, the Municipal Employees Retirement System, unchanged. So you had 2 unsustainable systems. One we're going to change 4 times to try to make it sustainable. The other one we're going to leave completely alone. Here's why.
Okay.
The state system, state legislators have to try to figure out how to fund.
Right.
Which means higher income taxes, higher sales taxes, cutting things that they don't want to cut in order to free up the revenue. So they've got to deal with this problem because it's right in their laps.
Right.
The Municipal Employee Retirement System, which they created, they don't worry about fixing it because it gets funded through local property taxes.
What?
So they just shift it down to the local level and say, you guys raise the property taxes all you want. That doesn't stick to us. So when Carl has to raise property taxes, nobody's running to his local legislator and saying, it's your fault. They're looking at Carl,
Right.
So that's some of the type of stuff that we deal with on a fairly regular basis.
So what I hear, and we're not in the system, but to give you a good example, Old Saybrook had, like many towns, what they call a defined benefit pension plan, which is basically a traditional pension.
Right.
Think of it as you get your check every month, no matter what the stock market does, no matter what, based on how long you worked, how much you earned. We changed that on July 1 of 2017 to what they call a 401A system, which is a defined contribution plan, which means every employee we hired after that, the town contributes up to 8% of that employee's salary, and the employee can contribute up to 8%. They must contribute at least 5%.
Okay.
But if the stock market, if they invest, if that's how they choose they want their investments, goes to zero, the taxpayer is not on the hook for that, okay? Because it's a what they call a defined contribution plan. It's not a guarantee of a monthly check. It's basically you save for your retirement, and the town will help you save for that retirement. Some of the towns that are in the MERS system, the state has gone to more of a hybridized?
Yeah, more of a hybrid shared risk type of retirement
system.
Okay.
And some of the municipalities in the MERS system say, hey, we want either a 401A, which is a defined contribution plan, or we want more of what the state has done with their employees, and they still haven't done it.
It's amazing.
And these towns, and when you're in a defined benefit system, you have a contribution you must make, or you should make, because when the market goes down a little bit, your contribution, your monthly checks still have to go out to your retirees. And the market has gone down, so there's less funding in the plan. So these towns want to be able to reform their, I'm not an expert on this, but I see what the problem is. These towns want to reform their pension plan, and the state is not allowing them to do it, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, and all the state had to do was just mirror its own reforms.
Yeah. Right.
Like if you're going to make the SERS, if you're going to make a reform to it, then that form should be mirrored in the MERS. You know what I mean? So to keep them in parity. But the state was never concerned with that parity because they looked at the municipal system, which they created and controlled, is not being their problem because they're not the ones who have to directly fund it.
Right.
And so that's one of the types of things that drives this state to having some of the highest property taxes in the country, that type of poor decision making. So, and the other thing I want to point out, because Carl has rightfully talked about the good work done in Old Saybrook, not to be in that position, but the communities that were lobbied essentially by the state to get into the municipal employee retirement system, it's like the Hotel California. Once you check in, you're never checking out.
Exactly.
You know, they've got you, and it's like you can't just say, you know what, this isn't working for us, we're out of it. It doesn't work that way.
No.
So they're stuck in this system that they know is unsustainable, that inherently continues to drive their cost up and up and up and up. And every year we go to the General Assembly and say, can you please fix this? And we're not asking for special treatment.
Right.
Just give us what you've given yourselves.
Right.
But we just haven't succeeded in getting it done yet.
So, you know, in an era right now where the state has money, because, you know, there was a time when the state didn't have money.
Yeah.
And
we've talked about it.
The Malloy years,
Right.
for instance, Ned Lamont came in and market gains and capital gains taxes and whatever happened, the state is chock full right now. And now, and I know there's law that directs where some of that funding should go. And a lot of it is going into the state pension system, which is fantastic.
Right.
I'm all for that. I think that's a good use of the funding. But the state needs to look at the trash issue, the MERS issue, and some of these issues, because there may never be another chance to get out ahead of some of this stuff and make an investment that may really benefit a lot of the towns in the state of Connecticut. So here you go.
It's a good segue talking about all the federal funds and some of the good work you're doing.
I know.
Yeah. So
didn't mean to take over as you host there, but
that's okay.
So I know briefly one of the things we were talking about prior to coming in the studio was all the money that's out there right now, all the grant money. We have the ARPA funds, so American Rescue Plan funds, which Old Saybrook received $3 million. You know, sometimes when I say that number, I go, $3 million, that's a lot of money. You know, our municipal side budget, not the Board of Ed side, but our municipal side budget is $21 million. You're talking about $3 million that we get to inject into the community. And we're making some decisions right now about how we're going to do that. I have a committee of 8 that meets every other Tuesday, and they're going to make some recommendations. So we have that money out there. You have the state has put forward, and Joe might be able to shed some light on some of the community challenge grants. I don't know how much you know about that grant program.
I'm not deeply versed in it.
But the state is looking for transformative public-private partnerships.
Okay.
So we have a couple properties in town that the landowners and Old Saybrook residents, if they hear this, will be able to determine which properties in town that are beautiful pieces of property that are underutilized, and it's a piece of property in town that is on the water, and people ask me about it all the time, so I've given up a lot of hints to it. But we're talking about maybe engaging with that, where the town would put in some money, the private property owner would have to put in some money, but you could make a $3 million investment that those two entities put in. You could make that into a $6 or $7 million project with the state community challenge funds that they're putting up.
Right.
So you could take a $3 million project and say, okay, can you make that happen with $7 million?
Sure.
That makes a big difference, you know, and it can put a lot of communities over the edge in terms of putting a transformative project on their map. There's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is the Infrastructure Act. And one of the things I want to do, Pete, on Saybrook Main Street, you probably know this, I want to put in for, and Joe, I mean, I don't know how many towns you're working with on this, if any, but I want to put in safer crosswalks on Main Street. I don't know if you've been on our Main Street.
Yes.
So we have a 4-lane Main Street
Yes.
with lots of parking on the side. So, and we have 4 crosswalks on Main Street. And when you come out onto that crosswalk, you sometimes take your life into your hands, because this car may stop, but the other car on the other side of that car may not stop. And that happens over the course of 4 lanes. So I'm going to borrow a page from Middletown, because Middletown, I don't know if you've been on their Main Street, but what they've done is they have bumped out their crosswalks and raised. So you come out and you're a little bit higher than the road, and the parking area, well, anyway, the crosswalks are bumped out right to the street line, and we're going to put in some signaling, and that could be $1 million project on Old Saybrook Main Street.
Right.
So through our COG, because the projects for the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Act, have to go through the COGs, we're going to put in for a Safe Streets grant. So one of the things I had a meeting on our executive committee for our COG last week, and we have a meeting this Wednesday of the full board. One of the things I told Sam Gold to make sure he puts on there is to keep highlighting all the money that is available.
Right.
Because what we don't want to do, and I'm part of a group of smaller communities in the lower Connecticut River Valley.
Yep.
I don't want Deep River or Old Saybrook or Old Lyme to say, oh, IIJA, it's federal, we can't do it. I don't want to lose sight of that, because there is a lot of money.
A lot of opportunity.
And opportunity. And that's true with the Community Challenge grant too, and some of the other grants that are coming out through the state, in addition to any bonding that the state does. We just got $500,000 through the bond bill that came through last year. We're going to put in for a STEEP grant, Small Town Economic Assistance Program, $500,000. And one of the things we're going to do, Pete, and this might be of interest to you, we want to build sidewalks from the Westbrook town line to the intersection of Spencer Plain Road, which is Route 166 and Route 1, which is the former Benny's Plaza, the Big Y Plaza. And there are 2 Vista communities over there, Vista Opportunities, and there's about 50 apartments over there. And a lot of those folks either ride their bikes or walk, and that's where they get their supplies at Big Y. Right. There's a Wayback Burgers there. There's a couple restaurants, and the old Benny's Plaza is slated to be redeveloped. So there's huge opportunity for those folks to either get further employment or amenities by building these sidewalks. So that's our STEEP grant that we're going to put in.
Nice.
We're recording this program on a Monday. It'll be Wednesday that we're going to submit.
Nice.
And you know, I've had a huge priority for sidewalks in our community. It's a great walking community, and we have gotten 2 connectivity grants from the state totaling $1.1 million. The town has put in every year from surplus funds, if we have a surplus, at least $200,000 to $250,000 into sidewalks. And once I finish this Westbrook to Old Saybrook project, you'll be able to walk from the Westbrook town line all the way to Saybrook Point, all the way to the train station if you want.
Really?
And not trip on your sidewalk.
No.
Yeah, and just or ride your bike if you want, even though, you know, I don't love when people ride the bikes on the sidewalk.
Yes, please.
And some of the walkers don't like it, but it's a huge priority for the town of Old Saybrook because we're such a walkable community.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, you have kids who, you know, use the sidewalks to go to high school, the middle school, the grammar school, and it's just a quality of life improvement that I love to do. It's my favorite thing.
I used your sidewalks in Saybrook this morning. I got off at the coffee place across from Staples.
The new one?
No. Okay. Staples.
Okay, yeah.
That America runs on.
Oh,
yeah.
Dunkin'. Yes. And got a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And walked to work.
Yeah. So from
my
there.
question for you is I believe it's Lind Street,
Yes.
which is where it's right across from TJ's.
Yes.
That's affordable. That's housing.
That
But
is.
what is that? And what is the building in front of that?
It's going to be a restaurant.
Okay, because I've been watching it go up. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
it's beautiful.
I see the bays. It's like,
Yeah.
is it going to be an auto garage? Because it just looks like it. Because it's got the automotive bays.
No,
it's
it's going to be a restaurant. And
Okay.
a couple things, and then I can turn it over to Joe maybe as the closer
You're
for the
doing
program.
just fine.
I just want to give a couple
plugs.
props to our Main Street. We've had a tremendous summer. We have a grand opening of Gargano
Yep.
Pasta coming up, which is the old North Cove Denali
Absolutely,
building
I walked by
on
it
Main
today.
Street. The proprietor of that building is Joel and Lanny Gargano. They're from Grano Arso in Chester, which is one of the top 10 restaurants always in the state of Connecticut. He is a brilliant chef. She's a wonderful business lady, and they are opening basically a smaller version of Italy right on Main Street, Old Saybrook. And then we have another sushi restaurant, a sushi restaurant coming in later on this summer. But probably the most exciting grand opening we're going to have. You ready?
Yep.
Wait for it.
Go for it.
A cat cafe.
A cat cafe.
What?
You got it.
Where?
Okay?
Okay then.
So,
Where?
it's going to be over by the running, where you get your running shoes. I'm forgetting Sound Runner. A lady. It's a philanthropic effort, obviously.
Okay.
There'll be rescue cats, and you pay $15 to come in and hang out for maybe 30 minutes, and you can have maybe a glass of wine or a beer and hang out with cats. And it is, apparently there's one in New Haven.
Okay.
And I was in Savannah last October, and there was one called Pounce, and that was on the Main Street in Savannah. And they're super popular
Okay.
with people who are not going to have an anaphylactic episode,
Right.
as you can imagine.
I'll tell you this. That
Anyway,
when
very
that
excited
opens-
about that.
When that opens, I'm going to take my daughter there. And the reason why is my daughter is 12 turning 13.
Yeah.
And I share with her all the time that having a teenage daughter is a lot like having a cat.
Yes.
I can walk over to the cat and kind of the cat wants to see me and I can pet on it and love on it. It'll purr for a second. And then when it's had enough, it turns around, hisses, and swats at you.
Right.
That's exactly what teenage girls do.
Yes.
It's the same response. So I tell her that all the time. I'm like, you're like having a cat in the living room. I come over and I talk to you and I love on you and I rub your back and we have a conversation and all of a sudden when you're done, you hiss at me about something and you move on.
Exactly.
So one of the things that Carl had talked about when he was talking about the IIJA grant and the sidewalk projects that I think gives a little bit of an opportunity to do is to also, number one, praise the COGS.
Yep.
And number two, we talk about our frustrations with the state. But here's an area that the state has great opportunity and is working hard to get it right.
Yep.
And so many props to the state for this working hard to get it right.
true.
And that is that it's very hard to write grants. And for a town like Old Saybrook or Old Lyme or whatever it is, they only have so many resources. And grant writing is difficult. But because of good work being done by the COGS, the COGS are becoming like aggregators of these projects to where they say, we may have 4 or 5 towns within our COG that want to use IIJA money to improve their crosswalks. Those don't need to be 4 or 5 separate grant proposals.
No, you can tag
In
it on
fact, you could even look at those. What the state is doing is saying, okay, COG, you send me yours. The state's looking at other COGs to send theirs in and to bring those together to write one big giant grant proposal to the federal government to do the project that Carl wants to do and the ones that other communities want to do to be able to really get as much of that funding as possible. So
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So
that's
$1 million
good work.
project for Old Saybrook is not going to register in Washington. However, a $25 million Safe Streets Connecticut-wide project is going to register.
Right.
And it'll have Ned Lamont and Mark Boughton championing it.
Right.
So.
And the COG director's doing the work.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, guess what?
Another hour?
We're done.
No?
500 in the books.
It is. Thanks, Joe.
Hey, Pete, congratulations.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay, and thank you so much.
You got it. On behalf of Carl, Fortuna, Joe DeLong, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next week.